Access Tucson? Closed? Forever? Tucson Mayor and Council are considering a budget proposal that sells the building that houses Access Tucson and eliminates all funding. These actions would end 30 years of community media that's accessible to all. Let our Mayor and Council know that Tucson still needs public access to community media. Find out how. Go to accesstucson.org.
Speech TV.
The future is now for the internet.
Hello and welcome to Live from Paris here on France 24. I'm Claire Murphy. Here's your headlines. Emergency bailout. The IMF steps in to bolster the fledgling government in Kiev as Ukraine's military loses its grip on eastern cities that appear intent on moving closer to Russia. Deemed a success, but over a dozen dead, Iraqis have voted in their country's first parliamentary elections since the withdrawal of US forces, but militants still managed to claim lives. And haunting allegations. Northern Ireland Republican leader Gerry Adams has always denied being in the IRA, but now he's in police custody, being quizzed about the killing of a Belfast woman over 40 years ago. And also coming up in the programme over the next hour, heading into the future with nobody at the wheel in business. We'll bring you a special report from Sweden on the newest generation of driverless cars. And in focus, the Pakistani authorities are blocking thousands of Western sites like YouTube, where radical Islamic content is flourishing. Our reporters investigate the country's internet policy. This is Live from Paris. Now, our top story: after months of turmoil, Ukraine is to get immediate help to stabilise its economy from the International Monetary Fund. The body signed off on a $17 billion two-year aid programme on Wednesday. The deal allows the disbursement now of $3.2 billion to Kiev and unlocks further credits from other donors of about $15 billion. IMF chief Christine Lagarde has admitted the programme faces risks as tensions fester with Moscow and the administration in Kiev tries to stem separatist unrest, but she remained upbeat.
Decisive measures were taken by Ukraine and decisive measures have just been taken by the IMF. So there has been a very strong endorsement for the program, which will release over the course of the next 2 years $17.1 billion in different installments over the course of those 2 years.
And we'll have more on the latest funding for Kiev with our business editor Stephen Carroll. That's in just a little while for you. Meanwhile, pro-Moscow militants have seized government offices in more Ukrainian towns. It's a further sign that authorities in Kiev are losing control of the country's eastern industrial heartland bordering Russia. In the latest development, gunmen turned up at dawn to take control of official buildings in Harlivka on Wednesday, which has a population of almost 300,000 people. Thomas Waterhouse has more.
The Ukrainian flag still flies high over Luhansk, but following Tuesday's seizure of government buildings by pro-Russian separatists, Kiev has been forced to admit that its grip on the town, like others in the east, is slowly slipping.
Law enforcement agencies, departments of police and security services in these regions, first of all, I mean the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, are unable to fulfill their duties to protect the citizens. They're helpless in these issues.
While the separatists agreed to leave the police station alone following the resignation of the regional police chief, the seat of local government and the prosecutor's office fell into pro-Russian hands, dramatically captured in minutes on Tuesday. Armed and masked men still stand guard in front of the broken windows and barbed wire barricades. Inside, according to the militant in charge, everything is now back to normal.
As you can see, there are some barricades here, because last night we were getting ready for further assaults, but so far everything, thanks to God, is fine. Everybody's happy, and employees came back to work.
In this eastern outpost of central government, bureaucrats say they were left to face the thousands of pro-Moscow militants alone.
We have no support from Kiev. As soon as the Interior Ministry's local office was stormed, Turchinov declared that all the police here were traitors, and they all gave away their weapons.
As well as the ever-present threat from separatists and a growing pro-Russian sentiment elsewhere, Turchinov added that his army was on full military alert, in light of what he called the real danger of a Russian land invasion.
And in the very latest development, Russia's military attaché to Kiev has been detained on suspicion of espionage and ordered to leave the country. That's according to reports citing the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. More on that as we get it. And our correspondent will bring us all the latest from eastern Ukraine in just a few minutes, so stay with us for that. For the moment, we'll move on. A Syrian government airstrike has hit a school in an opposition-held district of Aleppo. The British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says at least 19 people were killed in the strike, including 10 children. Locals said a missile slammed into the school in the east of the city as teachers and students were preparing an exhibition of drawings depicting the war. Valerie Amos, UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, has hit out against this latest violence.
It's absolutely horrific what is happening day by day. Children, women, men being directly targeted. It's a flagrant violation of the basic tenets of war.
Iraqis have voted in their country's first parliamentary election since the withdrawal of US forces in 2011. Heavy security fanned out across the country with hundreds of thousands of security forces deployed to protect polling stations. Vehicles were even banned in Baghdad. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who's seeking a third term, declared the poll a success, but dozens of attacks got through the security net, leaving at least 14 people dead.
As ballot boxes closed at 6 p.m. local time, at polling stations across Baghdad, authorities seemed happy with how the vote had gone.
It went very easily and smoothly, without harassment or incident. The voters came normally, they voted, and they went home.
Thanks to God, the turnout was more than 50%, and the process went smoothly and accurately. And there was not a single complaint.
There were fears turnout would be low given the recent wave of attacks nationwide. As a result, soldiers and police swarmed the streets and manned checkpoints. But the vote was nonetheless marred by a fresh spate of violence. Officials reported more than 50 incidents nationwide, including mortar fire and suicide bombs that left at least 14 dead and many more injured. Well ahead of exit polls, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki said his victory was certain. Despite the violence, he still described Wednesday's vote as a big success. US Secretary of State John Kerry agreed, saying that with their ink-stained fingers, Iraqis had sent a powerful message that their democratic process would not be thwarted by extremists. Vote counting began as soon as the polls closed, but preliminary results aren't expected until mid-May.
Now, let's return to our main story now. After losing Crimea to annexation by Russia, the fledgling government in Kiev continues to face the prospect of losing control of parts of the east of the country. Our correspondent Douglas Herbert joins us now from Donetsk. Doug, what can you tell us about the current security situation in this host of flashpoint towns across eastern Ukraine?
As you said, it really is. We are witnessing the gradual slipping away of the control of Kiev, of the situation here, at least in the two major regions of the east of Ukraine, the Lugansk region, where I was yesterday, and the Donetsk region, where I am right now. Effectively, what we're seeing is the same scenario repeating itself in town after town as they fall into the hands of separatists who are taking control of strategic buildings, sites, local administration buildings, TV towers, police stations. They arrive at the scene usually. It's usually a large crowd will gather in front of a building. They'll start shouting pro-Russian slogans. You'll then have a smaller core group of armed men, often in military fatigues, often carrying weapons, assault rifles, sometimes Kalashnikovs. They will very quietly and efficiently go about seizing the buildings. We witnessed the takeover yesterday of one building here in Donetsk. It was a customs building. When we arrived on the scene, the military men had just arrived, once again wearing uniforms with no real insignia, no markings that would identify them as attached to any particular force. They enter the building. Within a few minutes, you see the employees filing out. When you ask them what's going on, the armed men, that is, they say, everything's calm, everything's normal, it's under control. And the version they usually tell you is they're only there to search for weapons that they fear that pro-Ukrainian ultra-nationalists from, say, the right sector group are going to come to seize. So their version is they're there simply to take control of the building, to protect it, to search for weapons, and could protect the population. But in effect, what they're doing is they are taking over strategic sites, and they're taking them over from the control of the police. Whatever semblance of law and order we've seen in these areas of eastern Ukraine has totally fallen to pieces. The police usually stand aside. The police we saw, they usually are smoking cigarettes, watching everything happening, doing nothing whatsoever to intervene. The impression I've been getting is that the police a lot of the time, if not sympathetic to the cause, they're very ambivalent. They don't want to intervene. They don't want to provoke any actions that might then give the Russians a pretext to intervene. And that's the big fear here. The Ukrainian authorities really up against the wall, not wanting to take any actions that might in turn provoke the Russians, which still, by all accounts, have troops massed on the border, to come into Ukraine to intervene, in the Russian words, to protect Russian speakers in this area of eastern Ukraine. Very tense here today. It is May 1st as well, a traditional holiday where you often have parades, so the tension is particularly high, and some pro-Russians we spoke to yesterday said we might expect some action, as they put it, in the next few days.
And Doug, the separatists are also planning a referendum like the one held in Crimea. You've more information on that May the 11th vote.
Yeah, absolutely. The so-called Donetsk People's Republic made a declaration yesterday. Basically, they told us what the question is going to be. It's going to be a very straightforward question on May 11th. They are determined to hold this referendum against all the wishes and the rules of the authorities in Kiev. It will be, do you approve of the declaration of independence of the Donetsk People's Republic? That is, and I'm standing in the capital of that republic right now. It's just a few streets away. They say that they are going to go ahead. There will be 55 electoral districts. They're planning on setting up, if they can, 2,000 polling stations and printing 2 million ballots. And what's interesting here is that's a lot of ballots. The mayor of Kiev, who is still trying to hold things together administratively, he says, you know, logistically and technically, it's going to be impossible for these people to arrange this, to organize this referendum by May 11th. He says even if they push it back to May 25th, which is the day that Kiev wants to hold the nationwide presidential election, they still won't have time to print all those ballots. Yet when you go to the Donetsk People's Republic, the building, the administration building, like I said, right near here, and you ask them, they said, we will hold it wherever we can, wherever we have to. And that is why we are seeing the stepping up of the takeover of these towns, these buildings I was talking about. The more territory they take, the more buildings they take, the more credibility in their own eyes they have to be able to hold this referendum and have people be able to vote in their own towns. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the referendum in the next few days. If the local people vote in favor of independence, the leaders, the so-called self-proclaimed leaders of the Donetsk People's Republic, say they will not take part in the presidential election on May 25th. They will have absolutely nothing to do with it because, as they put it, why should they participate in the election of a neighboring country?
Douglas Herbert, thank you very much for bringing us all the latest on the situation there in eastern Ukraine. Now let's move on. Many of up to 200 girls kidnapped from a school in Nigeria are being forced to marry their Islamic extremist abductors. That's according to a civic organisation in Borno State where the girls disappeared from a fortnight ago. Protesters marched on the country's parliament on Wednesday, demanding the government do more to rescue the young women who are understood to be in the hands of Boko Haram. Turnout was hindered by heavy rain in Abuja, but several hundred people marched carrying placards urging the authorities to find our daughters.
We are so frustrated at the fact that 234 children could get missing, and there's actually no coherent explanation as to exactly the search and rescue operation that's going on concerning them.
Now, some more world news in brief for you. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has arrived in Ethiopia for the start of an African tour. He meets first with the government in Addis Ababa to discuss peace efforts in the region and strengthening ties. He'll also discuss a range of issues with the African Union. China's president has urged decisive actions after a deadly blast at a railway station in Xinjiang. State media reported the explosion took place on Wednesday as President Xi Jinping completed a tour of the region. 3 people were killed and 79 injured when attackers also used knives to attack victims at the Urumqi station. And it's been confirmed that controversial Toronto Mayor Rob Ford is set to take a leave of absence to get help for substance abuse. His lawyer made the announcement on Wednesday after a report surfaced about a second video of the mayor smoking what appears to be crack cocaine. He had recently launched his campaign for re-election later this year. Now, he's always denied being a member of the IRA, but Irish Republican leader Gerry Adams is in police custody this Thursday. He's being questioned about the killing of a Belfast woman over 40 years ago, but insists he's innocent. Jean McConville was a widow with 10 children when she was abducted and murdered by the IRA, who claimed she was a British informer. Josh Vardy has more.
Kidnapped, shot and buried in secret. Northern Irish mother of 10, Jean McConville, was disappeared by the Irish Republican Army just before Christmas in 1972. The IRA admitted her killing in 1999 and her body was discovered buried under this beach in 2003. The murder has dogged Gerry Adams, the leader of Irish Republican group Sinn Féin, for decades.
I regret very much that anyone was killed as a result of conflict in our country. I was one of a group of people who helped to bring that conflict to an end. Obviously, there are legacy issues, and we support victims who have been bereaved or have had people injured. And there's a lot of work to be done by all of us as part of a healing process in the time ahead.
Despite acting as the head of the IRA's political wing, Adams has always denied he was a member. That didn't stop him from becoming the infamous face of militant Irish nationalism across the UK during the IRA's 1980s bombing campaigns. 3 decades of violence between Catholic groups like the IRA, who wanted a unified Ireland, and Protestants who defended the country's union with Britain, formally ended with a peace deal in 1998. Sinn Féin has called Gerry Adams' arrest politically motivated, but it's unclear how it will affect Northern Ireland's power-sharing government, in which Sinn Féin member Martin McGuinness is Deputy First Minister.
A reminder of our headlines here on Live from Paris. Emergency bailout. The IMF steps in to bolster the fledgling government in Kiev as Ukraine's military loses its grip on eastern cities that appear intent on moving closer to Russia. Deemed a success, but over a dozen dead. Iraqis have voted in their country's first parliamentary elections since the withdrawal of US forces, but militants still managed to claim lives. And haunting allegations. Northern Irish Republican leader Gerry Adams has always denied being in the IRA, but now he's in police custody, being quizzed about the killing of a Belfast woman over 40 years ago. Now it's time for the day's business news. Stephen Carroll is back with me. Stephen, you're going to revisit our top story, the IMF bailout for Ukraine. You've the details.
Yeah, that's right. $17 billion, as you've been saying, over 2 years for Ukraine over this programme. But as we know, money from the International Monetary Fund is a loan. It has to be paid back, and it doesn't come without pretty significant strings attached. Now, the IMF has laid out a pretty stringent programme of what it wants Ukraine to do over the next 2 years to bring down its budget deficit, which stood at the end of 2013 at over $8 billion. Now, they've laid out some of those austerity measures in the announcement of this deal. They include a suspension of wage increases and pension increases. They want to reduce the number of people employed in the public sector. That's by not replacing staff who are retiring. They're also going to reform the tax regime, a big crackdown on tax evasion, and they're going to increase the taxes on alcohol and tobacco. The energy sector, one massive area of public expenditure because of the subsidies the Ukrainian government provides to the price price of gas. The IMF wants to see what they call a gradual but meaningful and broad-based increase in the price of gas. They point out that consumers in the Ukraine pay almost half what they pay in Russia for gas, so they want to make sure that those prices come more into line with their neighbours. They also want Naftogaz, the state-owned energy company, to reduce its operating costs in an effort to bring down its deficit by 2018.
OK, this is money that Ukraine badly needs.
Desperately so. The government's been saying for months now their foreign currency reserves are running very low. They're close to running out of cash. That's money it needs to pay for imports, among them energy imports. They owe the Russian gas company Gazprom $2.2 billion in unpaid gas bills. That's money that needs to be paid from somewhere. The perilous situation may mean, though, that the Ukraine is more likely to stick to their programme. This is their third bailout from the IMF. The previous two programmes had to be stopped because the government wasn't following the programme of reforms set down by the IMF. But Christine Lagarde has told France 24 this time she does think they will be able to stick to this programme. OK, from one bailout package to another, Portugal prepares to exit its EU IMF programme. Yes, and it's going to do so without the benefit of an emergency credit line. That's according to the Financial Times this morning, which says that Portugal has decided to follow Ireland in exiting its bailout cleanly without resorting to what's called this precautionary credit line. That's emergency funding that can come from the EU's bailout fund. That's because Portugal's borrowing costs have tumbled in recent months, leaving the government confident it can finance itself on the markets. A formal announcement is expected on this before Eurozone finance ministers meet on Monday. OK, look at the market, Stephen. OK, well, in Asia, indications from the Federal Reserve that the US economy was picking up, helping things on the Nikkei today. It closed up 1.3%. Sony, the electronics giant, reporting results just after the close there in Japan, showing that their losses for the year to the end of March are bigger than expected, about 15% higher, in fact. The markets in China closed for trading today. Those are the figures from Sydney that you can see in the red there, down almost 0.9%. OK, you're going to bring us across to Sweden now. They've seen the future of driving. They've seen the future and there's nobody in the driving seat. Yes, Volvo is to test computer-controlled cars. They say they can make it a reality by 2020. They have 100 people lined up to operate these so-called autonomous cars around the city of Gothenburg. They want that in place in 3 years' time. 50 kilometres of roads around the city will be used for the experiment, as our correspondent Malcolm Brabant has been finding out.
Engineers are honing the technology ready for 2017, when the public will finally get behind the wheel. The pilot scheme is very discreet so as not to shock other road users and cause accidents.
Now I'm pushing a button, and what happens is that the vehicle basically takes over.
What does it feel like?
It feels very natural, actually. It's not at all dramatic.
This is a historic drive for me, but it's completely uneventful. We're just driving along the motorway at about 70 kilometers an hour, sticking within the speed limit. Everything's going perfectly normally. We've had the odd couple of wobbles, but the systems have corrected that, and there's been nothing dangerous whatsoever. It's something we're all going to have to get used to.
A lot has to do with sensing technology, image processing, radar sensing, laser scanning, and building up a picture of what's happening around the car. So there's a lot of signal processing, control engineering behind it.
Unlike other manufacturers who've installed expensive rooftop sensors, Volvo is tweaking much of its current onboard safety features to control the car. It believes a version could go on sale by the end of the decade.
I think autonomous drive is, of course, at the end, something that will increase safety. That's our firm belief. So, I mean, it's comfort, but it's mainly also to reach our vision of having nobody casualties in a Volvo car by 2020.
One technological leap that's a must for the future, getting the car to find its own parking space. What's not to like?
And that wraps up your roundup, Stephen. Thanks very much, and we'll see you a little later. And now it's time for web news here on France 24.
NBA Commissioner Adam Silver has announced the National Basketball Association will be imposing a lifetime ban on Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling over his racist remarks. The ban comes with a heavy fine and has been widely praised online.
That investigation is now complete.
Sterling's lifetime ban from the league has certainly set social networks abuzz. Hailed on Twitter by several NBA owners, including Mark Cuban and Paul Allen. Important figures in the league who think Adam Silver did what was necessary and praised the way he's handled the affair. Dozens of professional basketball players, past and present, have posted similar comments. From LeBron James to Kobe Bryant to Shaquille O'Neal and also Magic Johnson, many have expressed their relief at seeing an openly racist individual like Donald Sterling being permanently banned from the NBA. And the decision will no doubt please some of the LA Clippers sponsors that, in view of the controversy, have put all ties with the team on hold. Companies like CarMax and Aqua Hydrate have posted statements on the web publicly slamming Donald Sterling's remarks and saying they would not associate with the Californian franchise until exemplary action had been taken against him. Since Saturday, Chinese web users trying to watch some of their favourite American TV shows on different streaming platforms have been greeted with a black screen and an error message. The Big Bang Theory, The Good Wife, NCIS and The Practice have all been pulled from China's mainstream online video services, to the great dismay of fans who've taken to the web to share their disappointment. The Big Bang Theory alone generated a thread of over 300,000 messages on China's Twitter equivalent Weibo. Web users say they don't understand the move, saying there's nothing controversial or offensive about the show. Certain media outlets have expressed a similar viewpoint and questioned the motives behind the censorship, as the 4 series don't contain scenes of violence or explicit images. In this online article, the Chinese edition of the Wall Street Journal suggests the government doesn't like the very westernized lifestyle conveyed in these programs. Content that had apparently not been submitted for validation to the national body tasked with regulating audiovisual programs, under new rules issued by the authorities in March. It comes in the midst of the massive government crackdown on online content initiated a year ago, following the appointment of Xi Jinping as China's new leader. Somersault Kiss is a new social media video fad in China, in which a couple attempts to perform an acrobatic kiss, which sees one half of the couple being flipped over before locking lips. It's proving pretty popular, but it's also somewhat dangerous. Several people have been hurt whilst attempting a somersault kiss, promoting the Chinese authorities to step in, releasing a statement warning web users of the dangers. Mosquitoes are responsible for 725,000 deaths per year, a staggering figure that makes a mosquito the world's deadliest animal, way ahead of the shark that kills an average of 10 people a year, or the tsetse fly, which causes some 10,000 deaths annually. Bill Gates posted this infographic to his blog last week to raise awareness about malaria, an infection that mosquitoes inject directly into our bloodstream when they bite. See the different stages of construction of New York City's Freedom Tower, or the new stadium in Nice, France. Mapping service Google Street View has launched a new app, which means web users can take a virtual trip down memory lane. The tool also shows how neighborhoods and cities looked before and after natural disasters, like Onagawa, Japan, for example, hit by a devastating earthquake back in 2011. Stuntman and superhero fan Ronnie Chalvis dressed up as Spider-Man for a recent spot of parkour, which involves getting around and over urban obstacles with a fast-paced mix of running, jumping, gymnastic rolls and acrobatics. You can watch his impressive performance in its entirety on the Ronnie Street Stunts YouTube channel.
And that was web news. Still to come, our focus report. The Pakistani authorities are blocking thousands of Western sites like YouTube, but radical Islamist content is flourishing. Our reporters investigate. That's all on Live from Paris after this quick break.
Beyond Business. Some say it's the underbelly of politics. Others say it's the necessity to make sure the voice of business is heard in the corridors of power. In the next Beyond Business, we shine the light on lobbying in the European Union.
Beyond Business, en France 24, en france24.com.
Welcome back to Live from Paris. I'm Claire Murphy. Here's your headlines. Emergency bailout. The IMF steps in to bolster the fledgling government in Kiev as Ukraine's military loses its grip on eastern cities that appear intent on moving closer to Russia. Deemed a success, but over a dozen dead, Iraqis have voted in their country's first parliamentary elections since the withdrawal of US forces, but militants still managed to claim lives. And a first derby final. Atletico Madrid has a shot at a first Champions League title against fiercest rivals Real Madrid after overwhelming Chelsea to set up a meeting with the 9-time winners. This is Live from Paris. But first, after months of turmoil, Ukraine is to get immediate help to stabilise its economy from the International Monetary Fund. The body signed off on a $17 billion two-year aid programme on Wednesday. The deal allows the disbursement now of $3.2 billion to Kiev and unlocks further credits from other donors of about $15 billion. IMF chief Christine Lagarde has admitted the programme faces risks as tensions fester with Moscow, and the administration in Kiev tries to stem separatist unrest, but she remained upbeat.
Decisive measures were taken by Ukraine, and decisive measures have just been taken by the IMF. So there has been a very strong endorsement for the program, which will release over the course of the next 2 years $17.1 billion in different installments over the course of those 2 years.
Meanwhile, pro-Moscow militants have seized government offices in more Ukrainian towns. It's a further sign that authorities in Kiev are losing control over the country's eastern industrial heartland bordering Russia. In the latest development, gunmen turned up at dawn to take control of official buildings in Horlivka on Wednesday, which has a population of almost 300,000 people. Shirley Sitbon has more.
The self-proclaimed mayor of Slovyansk enjoys speaking with journalists as long as they ask what he calls the right questions.
If you don't ask the right things, you'll be in trouble.
One question Vyacheslav Ponomaryov doesn't like is whether he gets orders and assistance from Russia.
I'm not in contact with Moscow. I've already told you this several times. Stop asking. We don't need Moscow.
But to authorities in Kiev, there's no doubt Russia has sent men and weapons to place Ponomaryov and other separatist leaders in power. Like some other pro-Russian leaders, Ponomaryov admits he used to be part of the Soviet army before running a small soap factory. Another separatist leader is still a member of Russian military intelligence, according to the EU and Ukrainian authorities. Igor Strelkov, who used to live in the shadow, now openly says he's behind operations in the separatist provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk.
My presence here is a result of the work I did in Crimea. Many comrades turned to me to ask to help bring about the Crimean scenario in their native regions of Donetsk and Luhansk.
Ukraine's separatist leaders were recently unknown in the provinces they now control. The new leader of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic used to be a security guard, sell candy, and recently sold shares in a Russian Ponzi scheme. Now, his name, Denis Bashilin, is on the EU sanctions list.
And just to bring you up to date, Russia's military attaché to Kiev has been detained on suspicion of espionage and ordered to leave the country. That's according to reports citing the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. More on that as we get it. Now, in other news, a Syrian government airstrike has hit a school in an opposition-held district of Aleppo. The British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says at least 19 people were killed in the strike, including 10 children. Locals said a missile slammed into the school in the east of the city as teachers and students were preparing an exhibition of drawings depicting the war. Valerie Amos, UN Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs, has hit out against this latest violence.
It's absolutely horrific what is happening day by day. Children, women, men being directly targeted. It's a flagrant violation of the basic tenets of war.
And meanwhile, Jordan has opened a new sprawling refugee camp to host Syrian refugees. It's estimated the camp will house 130,000 people and will eventually outstrip Zaatari, currently Jordan's largest refugee camp, when it's fully operational. Iraqis have voted in their country's first parliamentary election since the withdrawal of US forces in 2011. Heavy security fanned out across the country, with hundreds of thousands of security forces deployed to protect polling stations. Vehicles were even banned in Baghdad. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who's seeking a third term, declared the poll a success, but dozens of attacks got through the security net, leaving at least 14 people dead.
As ballot boxes closed at 6 p.m. local time, at polling stations across Baghdad, authorities seemed happy with how the vote had gone.
It went very easily and smoothly, without harassment or incident. The voters came normally, they voted, and they went home.
Thanks to God, the turnout was more than 50%, and the process went smoothly and accurately. And there was not a single complaint.
There were fears turnout would be low given the recent wave of attacks nationwide. As a result, soldiers and police swarmed the streets and manned checkpoints. But the vote was nonetheless marred by a fresh spate of violence. Officials reported more than 50 incidents nationwide, including mortar fire and suicide bombs that left at least 14 dead and many more injured. Well ahead of exit polls, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki said his victory was certain. Despite the violence, he still described Wednesday's vote as a big success. US Secretary of State John Kerry agreed, saying that with their ink-stained fingers, Iraqis had sent a powerful message that their democratic process would not be thwarted by extremists. Vote counting began as soon as the polls closed, but preliminary results aren't expected until mid-May.
In other news, a senior US senator has moved to block hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to Egypt. The move follows death sentences imposed on nearly 700 suspected Islamists, a continuation of the clampdown on the Muslim Brotherhood after last summer's overthrow of Mohamed Morsi. Subcommittee Chair Democrat Patrick Leahy said he's putting on hold the $650 million in military aid green-lighted by the Pentagon last week. Our correspondent in Washington, Lorna Shattuck, reports now.
Well, you may remember there was a great deal of wavering here in Washington, D.C. last July after the events in Egypt, with the Obama administration really tying itself in knots over trying not to call the events in Egypt a coup, because, of course, as you say, there is a law that if they were to call it a coup, that would mean any aid to the country wasn't legal. And the person who was instrumental in writing that law is Senator Patrick Leahy, who is now the chairman of the Senate committee in charge of foreign aid. And it's he who stepped forward now and spoken out against military aid to Egypt, in particular the delivery of 10 Apache attack helicopters for fighting terrorism in the Sinai. He says it's just not appropriate to give that kind of aid to Egypt at the moment, given the handing down of those death sentences. But the White House is extremely concerned about this, in particular the issue of terrorism in the Sinai. That's why it wants that aid to be delivered still, in particular those helicopters. And that's why it's potentially going to be fighting this. It's going to be putting pressure on Congress to get that aid approved. And Senator Leahy has said that as far as he's concerned, it shouldn't be delivered. And if he goes ahead and fails to approve the release of the aid, that sets the stage for something of a legal and contractual battle for the White House. And that could cause some key problems, particularly given Egypt, despite what is going on there politically, is a key ally in the Middle East for Washington. And that was seen this week, really, with the visit of Nabil Fahmy, the Egyptian foreign minister here in Washington. He was given a warm welcome both at the Pentagon and the State Department, but here in Congress, on the other hand, real concerns about this aid.
Lorna Shattuck in Washington there. And meanwhile, Egypt's justice minister has rebuffed international criticism of the mass trial and death sentences handed down. Nayer Osman insisted on Wednesday that Egyptian judges are independent and there's no government control over them. Now, some more world news in brief for you. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has arrived in Ethiopia for the start of his African tour. He meets first with the government in Addis Ababa to discuss peace efforts in the region and strengthening of ties. He'll also discuss a range of issues with the African Union. China's president has urged decisive action after a deadly blast at a railway station in Xinjiang. State media reported the explosion took place on Wednesday as President Xi Jinping completed a tour of the region. 3 people were killed and 79 injured when attackers also used knives against victims at the Urumqi station. And it's been confirmed that controversial Toronto Mayor Rob Ford is set to take a leave of absence to get help for substance abuse. His lawyer made the announcement on Wednesday after a report surfaced about a second video of the mayor smoking what appears to be crack cocaine. He had recently launched his campaign for re-election later this year. He's always denied being a member of the IRA, but Irish Republican leader Gerry Adams is in police custody this Thursday. He's being questioned about the killing of a Belfast woman over 40 years ago, but insists he's innocent. Jean McConville was a widow with 10 children when she was abducted and murdered by the IRA, who claimed she was a British informer. Josh Vardy has more.
Kidnapped, shot and buried in secret. Northern Irish mother of 10, Jean McConville, was disappeared by the Irish Republican Army just before Christmas in 1972. The IRA admitted her killing in 1999 and her body was discovered buried under this beach in 2003. The murder has dogged Gerry Adams, the leader of Irish Republican group Sinn Féin, for decades.
I regret very much that anyone was killed as a result of conflict in our country. I was one of a group of people who helped to bring that conflict to an end. Obviously, there are legacy issues, and we support victims who have been bereaved or have had people injured. And there's a lot of work to be done by all of us as part of a healing process in the time ahead.
Despite acting as the head of the IRA's political wing, Adams has always denied he was a member. That didn't stop him from becoming the infamous face of militant Irish nationalism across the UK during the IRA's 1980s bombing campaigns. 3 decades of violence between Catholic groups like the IRA, who wanted a unified Ireland, and Protestants who defended the country's union with Britain, formally ended with a peace deal in 1998. Sinn Féin has called Gerry Adams' arrest politically motivated, but it's unclear how it will affect Northern Ireland's power-sharing government, in which Sinn Féin member Martin McGuinness is Deputy First Minister.
Atletico Madrid's season will end with a shot at a first Champions League title against its fiercest rival. The capital's second club successfully negotiated its first European Cup semi-final in 40 years on Wednesday, overwhelming Chelsea 3-1 to set up a meeting with Real Madrid. Sarah Morris has all the latest from the Spanish capital now. She joins us by Skype. Sarah, big banner headlines in the local press this Thursday, I presume.
Absolutely. We've got the Sports Daily As headlining glorious Atletico, historical derby, and one of the main newspapers, El Mundo, saying Europe is a derby. These Spanish newspapers can't get over the fact that they'll have not just one but two teams at Lisbon, and that this is a historical first. Of course, Atletico, the fans are absolutely ecstatic. It's the first time in 40 years. They're already celebrating that fact alone, but they're wondering, can they take their first European Cup? And it's a typical, last night was a typical night of adversity, because that very first goal that Chelsea scored in the 36th minute was in fact scored by an idol to Atletico fans. He used to play at Atletico. Fernando Torres is a poster boy, and they had to really fight hard to come back and score those extra 3 goals, but they did it.
So the big question, Sarah, with 2 weeks to go, can the underdog win?
That is the big question. As you know, their budget is a fifth the size of Real Madrid. Real Madrid and Barcelona tend to dominate Spanish football. They have huge revenues, they have star players, and this team, Atletico, has really come from nowhere. It's looking very dangerous. It looks like it could take the Spanish Liga. It's very close, just 3 games away. And so many people are saying, don't bet against the underdogs. It really will be a David and Goliath struggle in Lisbon, but many people think Atletico could be the surprise winner.
Sarah Morris, thank you very much for bringing us all the football latest from the Spanish capital, Madrid. Now, here's a reminder of your headlines. Emergency bailout. The IMF steps in to bolster the fledgling government in Kiev as Ukraine's military loses its grip on eastern cities that appear intent on moving closer to Russia. But over a dozen dead. Iraqis have voted in their country's first parliamentary elections since the withdrawal of US forces, but militants still managed to claim lives. And a first derby final, as we just heard. Atletico Madrid has a shot at a first Champions League title against fiercest rival Real Madrid after overwhelming Chelsea to set up a meeting with the 9-time winners. Now it's time for Focus here on France 24, and it takes us to Pakistan. The country's internet is governed by a strict censorship policy. Popular websites like YouTube have been blocked for almost 2 years, alongside thousands of other sites. The authorities claim they're anti-Pakistani or anti-Islam, but Islamist propaganda is widely available online. It's being blamed for radicalizing young people without any clampdown by the state. So why this uneven approach? Our team on the ground sent this report.
This decrepit building is a popular meeting point for young people in Lahore. In internet cafes like this one, students try to get uninterrupted access to the World Wide Web. But for many others in the country, this is mostly a futile exercise.
This site is blocked. We don't have access to it.
Nearly 40,000 websites are inaccessible in Pakistan, including YouTube. It was blocked 2 years ago after the release of an anti-Islam film called The Innocence of Muslims, earning the ire of conservatives across the country. It is, however, easy to gain access to innumerable websites that promote jihadi activity and philosophy.
Such websites that spread hate should be blocked, but I click on it and it opens easily.
Most Islamist movements in Pakistan now have an internet cell. One of the largest religious parties in the country has set up shop in the basement of a mosque, and through these computers, the Jamaat-e-Islami attempts to lure users and followers.
I just uploaded the statement of our organization. It says the main reason for our struggle is to establish an Islamic caliphate in Pakistan.
There are currently 100 million people under the age of 25 who lie at the heart of such attempts that strive to censor any form of anti-Islamic expression.
In our party, we have a slogan: the youth will lead us on the path of the revolution. We have a political and ideological presence in the country, and the youth is our main target, because they are the ones who bring the movement to the foreground, and the internet is a way for us to address them.
Faced with the Islamicization of the internet, activists in Karachi decided to react to the ban of YouTube by releasing a string of videos. These videos have quickly come to represent Pakistan's freedom fighters of the internet. The movement is also fueled by an NGO that has regularly denounced the state censorship policies, especially of social networks. Even Facebook was temporarily banned when caricatures of the Prophet were found on it.
Facebook is a very important channel in Pakistan. So they have a kind of agreement with Facebook that whatever authorities would tell them, they would block it. So you would see a lot of human rights pages are blocked in Pakistan. They are not blasphemous. They have nothing to do with the nudity. So they are pages, for example, promoting secular discussion, promoting progressive alternate discourse, political discourse, and they're blocked.
In this residential area of Lahore lie the headquarters of those who called for the Facebook ban. The core group consists of businessmen, lawyers, engineers, educated people with heavy religious leanings. They have decided to create an alternate Facebook, one that is styled exactly like the original but for the Muslim world.
This is a live view of the Prophet's mosque.
Facebook boasts of more than 500,000 members. It is a social network that guarantees the immediate removal of any blasphemous post.
That Millet Facebook is a social network by Muslims, but it is a social network for everyone. It's a matter of responsibility. Just like you are going on the road, you are moving around your umbrella, you can't start hitting someone that, oh, I have unlimited freedom. Yes, you have your freedom, but as long as you are not going into someone's personal space.
For the 30 million internet users in Pakistan, censorship through citizen groups is not the only challenge. The agency tasked with censoring internet content is the Telecommunication Authority, controlled entirely by the Pakistani army.
And that was Focus. Next up, time for your sports roundup here on France 24, starting with the Champions League.
Atletico Madrid will meet Real Madrid in the Champions League final after they upset Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. Chelsea struck through Fernando Torres to make it 1-0 after a goalless first leg. Adrian Lopez equalised just before half-time before Diego Costa's penalty put the Liga leaders 2-1 up, and then Arda Turan completed their mission.
I think the 1-1 before the half-time was really the goal that changed everything. We get more confident. We went to the second half knowing that Chelsea had to score. They only had 45 minutes ahead, and they will give us more space behind their defense. And of course, the second goal killed the game.
Well, I think Mourinho changed their tactics a little bit, but we knew we would have opportunities and we were able to take them. This is a historic moment for the club, for me, for all my teammates, for the fans. It's a very beautiful thing. We tried everything. We didn't have too much luck either. One shot off the post, other shots just wide. And some very good saves by their goalkeeper. So I think we gave everything to win, but so did they. It was a great game, and they deserved to be in the final. In today's other semi-final, Valencia will need all the partisan support they can muster to try and overturn the 2-0 deficit from their first leg against Sevilla. Valencia coach Juan Antonio Pizzi urges his team to try and repeat their exploits from the quarter-finals when they beat Basel 5-0 at home after losing 3-0 in the first leg. We have to play the fixture and believe it's possible. During the match, we have to make the most of our chances. And we have to realise that if we are to come back, there'll be fewer opportunities than there were in the game against FC Basel. First half goals from Stefan Mbia and Carlos Bacca last week gave Sevilla a healthy advantage. Pizzi's ready for a goal fest. If they score a goal, then we have to be prepared to score 4 goals. If they score 2 goals, we must be prepared to score 5. And that's all within the course of the match. Sevilla will be looking to finish the deal at the Mestalla Stadium as they seek a place in the final in Turin on May the 14th. Mark Cavendish secured his 3rd stage win in 4 on the Tour of Turkey. Stage 4 led the peloton up into the mountains, and worsening weather conditions caused a big pile-up at the 40-kilometre mark on a descent. The race was restarted after the carnage, and the 6 breakaway riders before the crash were allowed to re-establish their 2-minute lead over the main group. But they ran out of steam and slipped back into the pack. Cavendish was then ushered into the line of fire. The Manxman then did what he does best and blasted off to secure his 3rd stage victory on Turkish soil. Estonian national champion Rein Terame comfortably retained his race leader's blue jersey.
Quick break now, but don't go away. Stuart Norville is up next as Live from Paris continues. He'll have more from Belfast on the arrest of Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams in connection with an IRA killing during Northern Ireland's troubles. Stay with us.
The business interview.
Marcus Carlson speaks to the people that matter about the issues that matter. Tune in for an in-depth and one-on-one discussion.
The business interview on France 24 and France24.com.
In Cabrini, where you either a part of a clan and some of us just ain't safe on certain parts of the land. Damn. And our mothers carry the heaviest loads. Every time we walk out the door, she'll pray for the soul. Man, all through the day, it be see you when I see you. At night, get caught in them buildings, and this wasn't on the beat.
This our neighborhood. This all we been
hang out.
Yeah.
Be around the people
we know.
We came up with. Sometimes you want to go where everybody know your name.
Yep.
Cheers. That's it. That's all.
And besides that, this is like the best place on earth to us.
You know, it ain't easy going elsewhere. Don't know nobody. Ain't nothing wrong with change, but it can be difficult in Chicago with everything that's going on. So you want to be somewhere where you feel safe. You know, especially with the lifestyle you live growing up. You can't go no other place and let your hair down. Meaning, you know, do what you do, because in a different area, you ain't grow up with these cats, and they ain't gonna hesitate. You know what I mean? Over here, you know, it'll be leniency. There's a lot of goofy stuff going on that you couldn't do nowhere else. Because it'll happen to you. It's Chicago. Chirac.
Chirac, baby.
Started skating with my friend. He had an extra board, and then he just gave it to me, and I've been skating ever since. Well, when I I don't learn a trick and I have my mind set on something and I'm not getting what I want, I just keep going for it until I get it right.
Access Tucson. Closed? Forever? Tucson Mayor and Council are considering a budget proposal that sells the building that houses Access Tucson and eliminates all funding. These actions would end 30 years of community media that's accessible to all. Let our Mayor and Council know that Tucson still needs public access to community media. Find out how. Go to